The crystal palace of Prime glowed with 1,000 colors as the celebration filled its great hall. Nobles moved through the crowd like living jewels, their iridescent skin catching the light, their forearms gesturing elegantly as they spoke. They had gathered to mark a full year since the political marriage between Princess and her human spouse, though none of them considered it anything worth celebrating. Daniel Cole stood near a pillar of blue crystal, watching the festivities with quiet eyes. He was tall for a human but short among and his simple diplomatic uniform looked plain against their flowing robes of woven light. He had learned to make himself small at these events, to stay out of the way, to endure. Princess approached him with a goblet in one of her 4 hands and contempt in her golden eyes. She was beautiful by any standard, with skin that shifted between silver and violet, and a face that could have been carved by artists. But her beauty meant nothing to Daniel. He had seen only her cruelty for 12 long months. "My pet is being quiet tonight," said, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Perhaps he is tired from doing nothing all day, as humans do." Laughter rippled through the gathered nobles. Daniel said nothing. He had been ordered by Earth's diplomatic corps to maintain peace at all costs. The alliance between humanity and the Empire was too important to risk over personal insults. "Look at him," continued, emboldened by his silence. "Soft skin that tears so easily, 2 arms like a half-formed child. I still do not understand why my mother thought this creature worthy of joining our bloodline." Queen watched from her throne at the far end of the hall. She was ancient even by standards, her skin darkened to a deep purple with age, her eyes sharp and calculating. She had arranged this marriage as a political tool, nothing more. Earth needed protection in the dangerous galaxy, and the needed human technology and resources. The marriage was a symbol, and had deliberately chosen her 3rd daughter, the least important of her children, to make clear how little she valued the humans. Daniel felt the weight of every stare in the room. He had endured a year of this treatment, a year of being called a pet, a creature, a mistake, a year of sleeping in separate chambers from his wife, of eating alone, of being excluded from every meaningful conversation. But he had not wasted that year. In the silence of his isolation, Daniel had studied. He had learned the language until he understood every whispered insult, every mocking joke spoken behind his back. He had read their history, their poetry, their ancient warrior traditions. He had trained his body in secret, in the dark hours when the palace slept. None of them knew. None of them bothered to look closely enough to see. Commander, the head of the palace guard, approached with a formal bow. His scales were deep green, and his 4 arms bore the scars of many battles. He looked at Daniel the way one might look at an insect. "Princess, your human seems lost. Perhaps he needs a leash so he does not wander into somewhere important." More laughter. Daniel kept his face calm. He had survived worse than words. He had survived war. The celebration continued until a messenger burst through the main doors, his scales pale with fear. He ran directly to Queen and knelt, speaking rapidly and formal. Daniel understood every word, though he pretended not to. The hall fell silent as the Queen rose from her throne. Her voice carried across the crystal chamber like thunder. "The Dominion has issued a formal challenge to our throne." Gasps and angry murmurs filled the room. There were a rival faction, a breakaway group that had left the Empire generations ago. They had been growing stronger in recent years, and everyone knew conflict was coming. But a formal challenge was something else entirely. It invoked the ancient laws. "They demand satisfaction through," the Queen continued, "single combat to settle the matter of our worthiness to rule." Daniel felt the tension in the room change. Was sacred, a tradition older than the Empire itself. It could not be refused without admitting defeat. "And who do they wish to face?" Commander asked, his hand moving to his sword. Queen's golden eyes swept across the room and landed on Daniel. Her expression showed nothing, but he saw something flicker behind her gaze. Calculation, concern. "Their champion, Warlord Or, has specifically demanded to face the weakest bloodline connection to our throne. He wishes to fight the human." The silence that followed was absolute, then laughed, a sharp and brittle sound. "This is a joke," she said. "They cannot expect my pet to fight. He would die in seconds. This is an insult designed to humiliate us." "That is precisely what it is," the Queen replied, "and that is precisely why we cannot refuse." Daniel felt every eye in the room turn to him. He saw fear on some faces, amusement on others, and cold satisfaction on a few who had always resented the human presence in their palace. Commander smiled openly, clearly pleased at the thought of watching Daniel be slaughtered. But Daniel did not feel afraid. He felt something he had not allowed himself to feel in a very long time. He felt awake. Storm toward him, her four hands clenched into fists. "Say something, you useless creature. Do you understand what this means? You are going to die, and my family will be shamed because of you." Daniel looked at his wife, really looked at her for the first time in months. He saw the fear beneath her anger, the desperation behind her cruelty. She had been given a husband she did not want, and now that husband was going to cost her everything. "I understand perfectly," he said in flawless, his pronunciation so precise that took a step backward in shock. "I have understood every word spoken in this palace for the past 8 months, every insult, every joke, every plan made in my presence because you all assumed the stupid human could not comprehend your language." The nobles nearest to them stared in disbelief. Commander's smile faded. "I know what is," Daniel continued, his voice calm and steady. "I know what it demands, and I know that running from this challenge would destroy everything my people have worked to build." Queen was watching him now with new interest. Elder, an ancient scholar who sat near the throne, leaned forward in her seat. "The challenge will take place in 3 days," the Queen announced, her eyes never leaving Daniel. "The human will fight." Daniel turned and walked toward the exit, leaving the stunned celebration behind him. As he reached the doors, he heard his voice, stripped of its usual mockery and filled with something that might have been wonder. "Who are you?" Daniel did not answer. He simply kept walking, because he had 3 days to prepare for a duel that would determine the fate of 2 civilizations. And he had no intention of losing. The royal council chamber buzzed with argument as Queen sat in silence on her crystal throne. Her advisors spoke over each other, their forearms waving in agitation, their voices rising and falling like storms. The topic was simple: what to do about the human. "We cannot let him fight," Commander insisted. "He will be killed in the first exchange, and they will claim we are so weak that we send children to die for us." "But if we substitute a warrior, we admit that humans are worthless allies," Elder countered. "We confirm exactly what Warlord or wants the galaxy to believe, that Earth's partnership with us is a mistake." "Then let the mistake die and be done with it," another advisor said. "The human means nothing. His death would simply prove that we should never have accepted this alliance." Queen raised one hand and silence fell immediately. "The challenge has been made according to ancient law. The human will fight. The only question is whether he will bring us shame through cowardice or shame through defeat." In her private chambers across the palace, Ambassador Grant was having a very different conversation. She paced before Daniel with fury in her eyes, her gray hair escaping from its formal arrangement. "This is unacceptable," she said for the 3rd time. "I am contacting Earth immediately. We will find a diplomatic solution. You are not a soldier anymore, Daniel. You are a diplomat, and diplomats do not fight duels to the death." Daniel sat calmly on a bench by the window, looking out at the alien sunset that painted the sky in shades of green and gold. "There is no diplomatic solution. They have accepted the challenge. If I refuse, Earth looks weak. If you extract me, Earth looks cowardly. Either way, our alliance dies. And if you die, what happens then?" "Then at least I died trying." "Stop packing." She had known Daniel for 5 years, had personally selected him for this assignment because of his calm temperament and sharp mind. She had never seen him like this. There was something in his eyes that reminded her of old mission reports, of the decorated Marine he had been before becoming a diplomat. "You actually think you can win?" she said slowly. Daniel did not answer that question. "I need you to trust me, and I need you to stay out of the way." That night came to Daniel's chambers. She did not knock. She simply pushed through the door and stood there, her silver skin flickering with emotions she could not name. Daniel was sitting on the floor, reading from an ancient text written in formal script. "How long?" she demanded. Daniel looked up. "How long what? How long have you been able to understand us? How long have you been pretending?" 8 months. It took me 4 months to learn your language well enough to follow conversations." Felt something twist in her chest. 8 months of mockery. 8 months of calling him a pet, a creature, a mistake. 8 months of insults that she had thought he could not understand, and he had understood every single word. "Why did you never say anything?" she asked, her voice smaller than she intended. Because I was ordered to keep the peace. Because starting arguments would not have helped anyone. Because I knew that eventually an opportunity would come for me to prove myself through actions rather than words. Moved closer, her golden eyes searching his face. You actually think you can defeat Or? He is the greatest warrior they have produced in a generation. He has killed dozens of champions in single combat. He has 4 arms, each one stronger than your entire body. How can you possibly believe you have a chance? Daniel closed his book and stood. He was shorter then, but something in the way he moved made her take a step back. Let me tell you about humans, he said quietly. We come from a world that tried to kill us every day. Predators with claws and teeth, diseases that swept across continents, whether that could freeze us or burn us alive. We have no natural weapons, no armor, no venom, but we survived anyway. Do you know why? Shook her head. Because we adapt, we watch, we learn. We find the weakness in anything that threatens us and we exploit it. That is what humans do. That is what we have always done. Pretty words, said, but her voice lacked its usual bite. Pretty words do not stop a war sword from cutting you in half. No, training does that. Daniel walked to a wall panel and pressed it in a sequence did not recognize. A hidden compartment opened, revealing a small training space that had been carved out of the stone. Practice weapons hung on the walls, and the floor showed marks of heavy use. Every night for a year, Daniel said. While you and your court laughed at the stupid human, I was here, learning. Stared at the hidden room, then back at Daniel. You are insane. Perhaps, but I am also your husband, whether you like it or not. And in 3 days I will fight for your family's honor. I would appreciate it if you did not mock me for it. The words hit harder than she expected. She had spent a year treating this man like an animal, and he had spent that same year preparing to die for her family. Shame was not an emotion royalty experienced often, but she felt it now. I was cruel to you, she said. The words came out stiff, unused to being spoken. Yes, you were. I thought you were beneath me. I thought all humans were. I know. Waited for him to say more, to accept her admission or reject it. But Daniel simply looked at her with those strange human eyes, unreadable and calm. Get some sleep, princess, he said finally. The next few days will be difficult for everyone. He turned back to his reading and left his chambers with more questions than she had entered with. In the corridor, she nearly collided with Elder, who stood in the shadows with a curious expression on her ancient face. He is not what we thought, said quietly. No, agreed, he is not. The question is whether that will be enough to save him. The next morning, Warlord Or arrived at the palace with an escort of 50 warriors. He was massive even by their standards, his scales dark red like dried blood, his 4 arms thick with muscle and covered in ritual scars. He moved through the palace halls like he already owned them. Daniel watched from a balcony as Or entered the throne room below. The warlord looked up and saw him, and a terrible smile spread across his alien face. So you are the human pet, Or called out, his voice echoing off the crystal walls. I have heard so much about you. They say you are soft. They say you bruise like fruit. They say you scream when you feel pain. Daniel said nothing. When we fight, I will hurt you slowly. I will take you apart piece by piece, and I will make sure you have time to feel every cut. Your death will be a lesson to every species in the galaxy. Humans are weak. Humans are prey. And anyone who allies with humans will share their fate. Daniel still said nothing, but he smiled just slightly, and that smile made Or's eyes narrow with sudden uncertainty. Then Daniel turned and walked away, leaving the warlord shouting insults at his back. He had 2 days left, and he intended to use every hour of them. In the throne room below, Elder watched the human disappear into the palace corridors. She had lived for 300 years, and she had learned to read people like others read books. That human, she thought, is not afraid. And that made her very curious indeed. The night before the duel, Daniel sat alone in his chambers, sharpening a blade he had made himself in the palace forges. The work calmed him, the repetitive motion of stone against steel, the soft ring of metal finding its edge. He had learned this skill from his grandfather, long ago on Earth, in a small town that felt like another life entirely. A knock came at his door. He did not look up. Come in. The princess entered and stopped when she saw what he was doing. She had never seen a human performing such a task. It seemed primitive to her, ancient, and yet there was something almost sacred in the way Daniel moved. "How did you know it was me?" "You walk differently than the guards. Lighter. You hesitate before you knock like you are not sure you want to be here." Moved closer and sat on a chair across from him. For a long moment, she simply watched him work. The blade caught the light as he turned it, checking for imperfections. "I could not sleep," she admitted. "Neither could I." "Are you afraid?" Daniel considered the question seriously. "No, I have been afraid many times in my life. This is not fear, this is focus." "What is the difference?" "Fear makes you hesitate, focus makes you ready." Pulled her legs up beneath her, a position that would have been improper in public but felt natural here in this strange midnight moment. "Tell me about your life before you came here. I realize I know nothing about you. I never bothered to ask." Daniel set down the blade and the sharpening stone. He looked at his wife, really looked at her, and for the first time he saw curiosity instead of contempt. "I was born in a small town on Earth. My family had nothing. My father left when I was young and my mother worked 3 jobs to keep us fed. When I was 17, I joined the military. It was the only way out." "Out of what?" "Out of poverty, out of hopelessness, out of a life where nothing I did would ever matter." Listened as Daniel told her about his years as a Marine, about the wars he had fought in, the friends he had lost, the things he had done that still haunted his dreams. He spoke without self-pity, without pride, simply stating facts that had shaped him into the man he had become. "You have killed before," said when he finished. "Yes, many times." "And it bothers you?" "Every death bothers me. The ones that do not bother you are the ones that should worry you most." "Then why do you fight, if it causes you such pain?" Daniel picked up the blade again, turning it slowly in his hands. "Because some things are worth fighting for. Because sometimes the only way to protect what you love is to stand between it and the darkness. Because running from a fight does not make the fight go away. It just means someone else has to face it in your place." Felt something shift inside her chest. She had been raised to believe that humans were lesser beings, weak and emotional and unworthy of respect. But this man sitting before her was not weak. He was simply different. His strength did not come from his body or his weapons. It came from somewhere deeper, somewhere she did not fully understand. "I owe you an apology," she said. "A real one, not the half-hearted admission I gave you before." Daniel looked up surprised. "I mocked you because I was afraid," continued, forcing the words out even though they hurt. "I was afraid that being married to a human would make me lesser in the eyes of my people. I was afraid that your weakness would become my weakness. So I attacked you before anyone could attack me." "I know. You knew." "I have met many people who hurt others because they are afraid. You learn to recognize the pattern." Wanted to say more, but a soft chime interrupted her. Daniel pressed a panel on his wall, and a holographic image flickered to life. A woman's face appeared, strong and weathered, with short gray hair and eyes that had seen too much. "Captain," Daniel said with genuine warmth, "I was not sure you would call." "Like I would miss wishing you luck before a fight," the woman replied. Her voice was rough but kind. "I see you are still getting into impossible situations." "Old habits." Captain smiled, and even through the hologram could see the deep bond between these two humans. "Do you remember Station, when we were outnumbered 30-1? "I remember." "What did I tell you then?" Daniel's expression softened with memory. "You said that numbers do not matter when your enemy does not know what you are capable of. You said that the biggest advantage is being underestimated. And have these aliens been underestimating you?" "Every day for a year." Laughed, a harsh sound full of genuine amusement. "Then they are in for a surprise. Fight smart, Daniel. Fight like you were trained and come home alive." The hologram flickered and died. Looked at Daniel with new eyes. "She was your commander." "She was my teacher. Everything I know about survival I learned from her." Morning came too quickly. The arena of ancestors filled with from across the empire, their iridescent skin creating a sea of shifting colors in the massive crystalline coliseum. Foreign ambassadors occupied special platforms, and holographic recorders broadcast the event to 100 worlds. Daniel stood in the preparation chamber beneath the arena floor, wearing simple clothing that allowed him to move freely. High Priest entered, his ceremonial robes trailing behind him, carrying 2 weapon cases. "The challenger has chosen his weapon," announced formally. the traditional war sword of the forged for four-armed combat. He opened the first case, revealing a massive blade that seemed designed more for execution than fighting. Daniel studied it without expression. "And now you must choose," continued, opening the second case. "Here is the standard long sword appropriate for formal combat." Daniel looked at the weapon, then shook his head. "I invoke the right of, I wish to choose a different blade." His eyes widened. "That right has not been invoked in 200 years. What weapon do you request?" The priest stared at Daniel as if he had lost his mind. "The is a ceremonial weapon. It has not been used in actual combat for centuries. It is too short, too light. You would be giving yourself a death sentence." "Nevertheless, that is my choice." Word spread quickly through the arena. By the time Daniel emerged onto the sand, holding the small curved blade that looked almost like a toy compared to Or's war sword, the crowd was already laughing. The sound washed over Daniel like waves against rock, touching nothing inside him. Or stood in the center of the arena, his red scales gleaming with oil, his war sword held ready in his two upper arms while his lower arms hung loose and ready to grab or strike. He saw Daniel's weapon and threw back his head with a roar of laughter. "This is what the humans sent against me, a child's blade. I almost feel insulted." In the royal viewing box, Queen turned to Elder with cold fury in her eyes. "Did you know about this?" His ancient face was unreadable. "I suspected." "Suspected what? That the human was suicidal." "No," leaned forward, her eyes fixed on Daniel as he walked calmly toward the center of the arena. "I suspected that he found the old texts, the ones in the forgotten archive, the ones that describe the original weapon of our founding warriors." His fury shifted to confusion. "What are you talking about?" "It was not always ceremonial, my queen. It was the weapon of the first champions, designed not for strength but for precision, designed to defeat larger opponents through technique rather than power. The style was called Flowing Shadow, and it was lost when our people grew larger and stronger and decided that raw force was more impressive than subtle skill." Looked back at the arena, where Daniel had taken his position opposite Or. "Are you saying the human learned a fighting style that our own people have forgotten?" "I am saying that I do not know what that human is capable of, and I suspect no one else does either." The gong sounded, the duel began. And in that moment everything changed. Or attacked like a storm. His war sword carved through the air in patterns that would have killed most opponents before they could even raise a defense. The blade was nearly as long as Daniel was tall, and the warlord wielded it with all four arms, switching grips and angles with terrifying speed. Daniel did not try to block, he simply was not there. He moved like water flowing around stone, stepping and shifting and ducking beneath strikes that missed him by inches. The small stayed low, never rising to meet the war sword, never attempting to match power with power. The crowd fell silent with confusion. They had expected blood, they had expected screaming, they had expected the human to die within seconds. Instead, they saw something they did not understand. The human was not fighting, he was dancing. Or pressed his attack, growing faster and more vicious with each passing moment. Sweat began to appear on his scales as his four arms worked harder and harder to catch an opponent who refused to stand still. Every strike found empty air. Every killing blow landed on nothing. "Stand and fight, coward," Or snarled, his breath coming harder now. "Face me like a warrior." Daniel said nothing. He kept moving, kept watching, kept learning. His eyes tracked every twitch of Or's muscles, every shift in his weight, every small tell that revealed where the next attack would come from. Humans had always been good at pattern recognition. It was how they had survived a world full of predators. It was how they had learned to kill things bigger and stronger than themselves. In the royal viewing box, Elder was leaning so far forward she nearly fell from her seat. Her ancient eyes were wide with wonder. "There," she whispered. "Do you see it, my queen? Do you see what he is doing?" Queen did not see. She saw only a human avoiding death through luck and speed. But Commander, standing behind the queen with his hand on his sword, saw something that made his scales go pale. "He is reading him," said slowly. "The human is reading, or like a training partner, he is learning his patterns." "That is impossible," said. "No one can learn a fighting style in the middle of combat." "Humans can," replied. "I have studied their species. Their brains are designed for exactly this kind of rapid adaptation. Give a human enough time to observe an opponent, and they will find every weakness, every flaw, every opening. Then Or needs to end this quickly. Yes, but I do not think he can. In the arena, Or was beginning to tire. His attacks came slower now, each one fueled more by rage than by skill. He had never faced an opponent who simply refused to engage. His entire fighting style was built around overwhelming force, around crushing enemies beneath the weight of his assault. But Daniel would not be crushed. Daniel would not even be touched. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The crowd began to murmur, their mockery shifting to uncertainty. This was not how duels were supposed to work. The human should have died by now. The human should at least be bleeding. Fight me, Or roared, his voice cracking with frustration. Stop running and fight me, you worthless creature. Daniel stopped moving. The arena went completely silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. As you wish, Daniel said, and then he attacked. The moved so fast it seemed to blur. Daniel closed the distance between them in 2 steps and slid beneath Or's guard like smoke through fingers. The small curved blade flicked out once, twice, 3 times, each strike precise and surgical. Or stumbled backward with blood flowing from 3 cuts on his lower arms. Not deep wounds, not killing wounds, but wounds that should have been impossible. His eyes went wide with shock. What was that? He gasped. What did you do? Daniel did not answer. He moved again, flowing around Or's desperate counterattack and landing 2 more cuts on the warlord's legs. The danced in his hand, singing through the air in patterns that the watching had never seen before. But Elder had seen them, in ancient texts, in faded illustrations, in descriptions of a fighting style so old that most believed it to be myth. Flowing shadow, she breathed. He actually learned flowing shadow. Queen turned to her with disbelief painted across her features. That style has been lost for 1,000 years. The texts are written in a dead language. Even our scholars cannot fully translate them. Then it seems the human learned a dead language as well. In her private viewing box, watched her husband with her hands pressed against the crystal barrier. She had seen Or fight before, had watched him destroy champions from a dozen worlds. She had never seen him look afraid, but he looked afraid now. Daniel was everywhere at once. He did not fight like with power and aggression. He fought like a ghost, appearing and disappearing, striking from angles that should not have been possible. There was an extension of his arm, moving with a grace that made the ancient weapon look alive. Or tried to adjust. He shortened his swings, pulled his guard, used all 4 arms to protect himself rather than attack. But Daniel had spent 10 minutes learning every flaw in his technique, and now he exploited them without mercy. A cut across the shoulder, a slash along the side, a thrust that opened a wound on Or's hip. None of them fatal, but each one draining strength, draining speed, draining hope. This is impossible, Or gasped, his red scales now slick with his own blood. You are just a human, just a weak, soft, pathetic human. Daniel paused for a moment, standing just outside the warlord's reach. His breathing was controlled, his posture relaxed, his eyes calm and focused. Yes, he agreed, I am human, and that is exactly why you are going to lose. He moved one final time. The flashed in a complex pattern that the watching crowd could barely follow, or tried to block, tried to counterattack, tried to do anything to stop what was happening. But the human was too fast, too precise, too perfectly in control. The warsword flew from Or's grip and clattered against the arena floor. The warlord fell to his knees, the pressed against his throat, with Daniel standing over him like a statue carved from ice. Silence, complete and total silence. Then Daniel spoke, his voice carrying across the arena without raising it above a normal volume. Yield. Or looked up at the human who had defeated him. Hatred burned in his eyes, but beneath the hatred was something else, something that might have been respect. If you are going to kill me, do it. I will not beg. I am not going to kill you, Daniel said. The duel is over. You challenged us to prove we were weak. I have proven otherwise. There is no need for more blood. Mercy, or spat. You offer me mercy, that is weakness. No, killing someone who cannot fight back is weakness. Mercy requires strength. Daniel lowered the but did not step away. Go home. Tell your people what happened here. Tell them that the humans are not prey. Tell them that anyone who threatens the Empire or its allies will face the same fate. Or's 4 arms hung limp at his sides. His wounds were not fatal, but his pride had been cut deeper than any blade could reach. "I yield," he said finally, the words seeming to tear themselves from his throat. The arena erupted, not with cheering, not yet, but with a sound that was almost like the roar of the ocean. Shock and disbelief and something that might have been wonder, all mixed together into a wave of noise that crashed against the crystal walls. Daniel turned and walked toward the exit, leaving or kneeling in his own blood. As he passed the royal viewing box, he looked up at Queen and gave a small bow. The gesture was respectful but not submissive, the bow of an equal, not a servant. Found herself bowing back before she realized what she was doing. And in her own viewing box, pressed her forehead against the crystal and allowed herself to breathe for the first time in 20 minutes. Her husband was alive. Her family's honor was intact, and everything she thought she knew about humans had just been shattered into 1,000 pieces. She needed answers, and she knew exactly who to ask. The throne room had never felt so crowded. Every noble in the palace had gathered to witness what would happen next. Holographic recorders captured everything for the billions watching across the empire and beyond. The air itself seemed to vibrate with tension and disbelief. Daniel stood before Queen, his simple clothes still showing traces of sand from the arena. The hung at his side, cleaned and sheathed, looking almost innocent after the destruction it had caused. He waited in silence while the Queen studied him with eyes that had seen centuries of war and politics and impossible things. "Tell me how," said finally. "Tell me how a human, a species we considered barely more than intelligent animals, learned a fighting style that our own people lost 1,000 years ago." Daniel met her gaze without flinching. "Your palace library contains an archive of ancient texts. Most of them have been forgotten because they are written in languages that are no longer spoken. I found those texts during my first month here. I spent the next 11 months translating them and practicing what they described." "Impossible. Those texts cannot be fully translated even by our greatest scholars." "With respect, your scholars have not tried very hard. They considered the texts ceremonial rather than practical. I approached them as instruction manuals because that is what they were." Elder stepped forward, her ancient face alight with something that looked almost like joy. "The flowing shadow style. You actually reconstructed it from the original documents." "Not completely. There are gaps in the texts that I could not fill, but I learned enough to understand the principles behind the technique. The rest I improvised based on fighting styles from my own world." "What styles?" pressed, her scholarly curiosity overcoming court protocol. "Several: Brazilian, Kali stick fighting, European fencing, Japanese sword techniques. Humans have been developing combat arts for thousands of years. We have experimented with every possible approach to fighting. The flowing shadow style reminded me of several earth techniques that also focus on using an opponent's strength against them." Queen rose from her throne and descended the steps until she stood directly before Daniel. She was taller than him by nearly 2 feet, and her presence radiated power and authority. But Daniel did not shrink back. "Why?" she asked. "Why did you do all of this? You could have endured your time here quietly, performed your diplomatic duties, and returned to Earth when your assignment ended. Instead, you spent a year preparing for a fight that might never have come. Why?" Daniel was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Because I was determined to be worthy." "Worthy of what?" "Of the alliance my people sought, of the position I was given, of the wife I was assigned even though she never wanted me." Daniel paused and his voice softened. "My entire life I have been underestimated because I came from poverty, because I was small for a soldier, because I did not look like what people expected a fighter to look like. I learned long ago that the only response to underestimation is to prove people wrong, not through words, through action." Stepped forward from where she had been standing among the other nobles. Her silver skin had faded to a pale gray, and her 4 hands were clasped together as if she needed to hold onto something. "You did this for me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I did this for everyone, for Earth, for the alliance that could protect both our peoples. But yes," Daniel turned to face his wife, "I also did it for you, because you are my wife whether you accept me or not, and I do not abandon the people I am bound to, even when they give me no reason to stay." The throne room was utterly silent. Nobles who had spent a year mocking the human pet now looked at him with expressions they could not name. Commander, who had smiled at the thought of watching Daniel die, now stood with his eyes fixed on the floor. Queen raised one of her 4 hands and placed it on Daniel's shoulder. The gesture was almost maternal, though the weight of it spoke of ancient strength. "You have shamed us," she said, and the words sent a ripple of shock through the gathered nobles. "Not through your victory, but through our blindness. We looked at you and saw only a human. We saw soft skin and strange features and a body that seemed weak by our standards. We never thought to look deeper. We never considered that strength could wear a different face." She removed her hand and stepped back, her voice rising to carry across the room. "Let it be known throughout the Empire. Daniel Cole is hereby granted the title of Reborn, Keeper of the Forgotten Way. He is no longer a diplomatic attachment. He is a champion of the throne, with all the rights and privileges that title carries. Anyone who disrespects him disrespects me personally." The nobles bowed, some with genuine respect and others with barely concealed shock. Daniel accepted the honor with a simple nod, neither gloating nor false modesty in his expression. Later, after the ceremony ended and the crowds dispersed, Ambassador Grant found Daniel in a quiet corridor overlooking the palace gardens. She stood beside him in silence for a long moment, watching the alien plants sway in the evening breeze. "That was either the bravest or the thing I have ever seen," she said finally. "Probably both. What happens now? Now we have a real alliance, not one based on politics and convenience, but one based on mutual respect. The do not easily acknowledge outsiders as equals. I just gave them a reason to see us differently." Shook her head slowly. "You know, when I assigned you to this post, I thought you would be a calming presence, someone to keep the peace through diplomacy and patience. I did not expect you to become a legendary warrior." Daniel smiled just slightly. "Diplomacy and patience got me through the first year. The legendary warrior part was a backup plan." That night came to Daniel's chambers again. This time she knocked and waited for permission to enter. When Daniel opened the door, she stood in the corridor with an expression he had never seen on her face before: uncertainty, vulnerability, hope. "May I come in?" "Of course." She entered and stood awkwardly in the center of the room, her forearms moving restlessly as if she did not know what to do with them. Daniel waited, giving her time to find her words. "I have been thinking," began, "about everything that happened, about the year we spent together, if you can call it that, about who I thought you were and who you actually are. And what conclusions have you reached? That I was a fool, that I let my pride and my fear turn me into someone cruel, that you deserved better than what I gave you, and that I am not sure I deserve the second chance you seem to be offering." Daniel moved to the window and looked out at the stars. So many of them, scattered across the alien sky. Somewhere out there was Earth, the tiny world that had produced a species capable of surviving anything. "When I was young," he said quietly, "my mother told me something I never forgot. She said that people are not defined by their worst moments. They are defined by what they do after those moments, by whether they choose to grow or stay the same." He turned back to, "You were cruel. You were unfair. You hurt me in ways that will take time to heal. But you are also standing here now admitting that you were wrong. That takes courage. More courage in some ways than fighting in an arena." Eyes glistened with something that might have been tears, though Daniel was not sure if could cry. "Where do we go from here?" she asked. "Wherever we choose. We could continue as we were, occupying the same space without ever really knowing each other. Or we could try something different, something harder but more worthwhile." "What would that look like?" Daniel picked up the from where it rested on a table near the wall. He held it out too, offering her the hilt. "I could teach you. The flowing shadow style. It would give us something to do together, something to build on. And perhaps along the way we might learn other things about each other." Took the blade carefully, feeling its weight, its balance. Such a small weapon, such an unassuming thing, and yet it had changed everything. "I would like that," she said softly. Outside the window, the stars continued their ancient dance across the sky. Somewhere in the galaxy, the news of the day's events was spreading, carried by ships and signals to 1,000 worlds. The story of the human who had been mocked and underestimated and dismissed. The human who had smiled at death and won. But in this quiet room, none of that mattered. There was only a man and a woman, both damaged in their own ways, both carrying scars that did not show on their skin. They had been thrown together by politics and convenience. What they built now would be their own choice. Daniel watched as tested this edge with careful fingers. She looked up at him with golden eyes that held no contempt, no cruelty, only the fragile beginning of something real. "Show me," she said. And so he did.